What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode on the Landscaping Podcast, powered by Landscaping Unlimited. Today, you've got Shay and I behind the mics talking to you about the different types of soils that are going to be found in eastern North Carolina. I wanted to jump on this because one of the most fascinating parts of landscaping and hardscaping, we started going from job to job, everything would change in how we did what it is we were doing when we had to dig. And Shay brought out a map to me, and he explained that in one community, you could see 3 different types of soil. And then you go around the larger area that we're working on, let's say east of Raleigh, south of Virginia, north of South Carolina. Inside that frame, you're going to find an entire network of different soils. As landscapers and hardscapers, we've got to factor that into our estimates. We've got to factor that into how we run our projects and the jobs that we're doing. And so I wanted to pick Shay's brain and have him explain to all of you what he explained to me, because like I said, it's fascinating stuff if you're into this. I like to play in the dirt, and so it's right up my alley. But let's go. Shay, let's talk dirt.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with dirt as well as soil. So
let's start with what's the difference between dirt and soil?
All right, so dirt is dead. There's no living organisms in them. Soil is living, which is like topsoil. So like if you're putting that in your yard, then you're going to have living soil that has nutrients and organisms in it that allow your plants to pull out those nutrients, whereas dirt is just plain dirt, dead, no nutrients in it. So you'd use that for fill material only, and you wouldn't use that to actually plant plants into. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Cool.
I didn't know that.
Yep. I think also we can dive into, there's like 3 main soil types, which make up all types of soil that we call today. So you've got clay, silt, and sand. Those 3 characteristics are what make up all soil types. Sand being a much coarser grain, like you would find on the beach, which would be permeable, allow all that water to go through. And no matter how hard you try to, you cannot make it stick together and make a ball. If you were to stick it in your hand, ball it up, it will fall apart when you open your fingers and will not form a clump or a dirt clod. Whereas as you start getting into your clay materials, then your silt levels go up, and you end up holding and retaining more moisture, which then allows you to ball that clay or silt up. And as you squeeze it, you'll actually see it form together into a ball. When you open your hand, it will still be a ball and not fall apart. So the higher silt and clay levels you have, the more water retention. It also means less drainage you have too. So, there's that fine line that you want to be, which would be like a loamy soil, which is a good percentage of clay and sand, so that it balls up and forms and will hold some moisture, but not so much moisture that you end up causing fungus problems or drainage issues where your ground won't drain.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So looking at that, is this based upon water? Is this like, I'm thinking about Cypress Landing. I'm thinking about the foundation we're doing in the Punga River. Both of those are very heavy clay dominant soils. So is it based upon the water that it's near? It's just geography over the years. Like, have you done the research into how we got to how we are?
Yeah, so soil types are based off like basically the size of the grain of the sand or the clay, and how big that particle is. That's what actually consists of, what type of soil you have. But for us geographically, where we're at, we've got some sandy loamy, like some good loamy soils in parts of our area, and then you can drive across the river. For us particularly, it turns into straight clay where you have pottery. You literally could mold bricks out of some of these people's yards. But I don't know the geographical reasons why we're particular ways. However, I know how to define and see which soil types we have on the jobs we're working, which then leads us into what we're doing at that job and how we would prepare the soil for the longest for the longevity of the project, and how long something would sustain or hold up, in those environments, which turns into how we build our base, how we plan for drainage and all that stuff, all based off of what the soil type is on that property.
So what are some examples of that? So what way would we do something different based upon, will they have clay versus sand?
Yeah, so if we have a large clay yard, then we'll go into patios. We'll talk just patios in this particular portion right here. For a clay yard, if it's all clay, then what we're looking at is, the ground can't hold any more water, because the clay will create, most of the time, what we end up with calling a hard pan, where the water can't permeate below that. And so it's literally just running across that hard pan that layer in the soil where the water can't go any deeper. And so if we're digging out for a patio, then a lot of the times that water we know right away that we cannot make that water go down. No matter what we do, the water won't go down, which means that a permeable patio without drainage in the patio won't work because you're on clay. The water cannot go down. So you have to build a non-permeable patio, and your base would be different because you don't want to plan on water being in there. Particularly one neighborhood we have, there's natural veins in the soil where water runs out, and so as you're digging, you'll actually notice you're only a foot down, and you've got water coming up when you're 20 feet above the soil, above water level or sea level, and the reason for that is because it's just a weaker spot in that soil. So the groundwater has hit these hard pans and is flowing its way through these veins, and then because you loosened it up, it's coming out only a foot deep, even though you're 20 foot above sea level. And so we have to make sure that we put our fabric in, we put our base in, in conjunction to that, so that we don't create an unstable base for our patio. Retaining walls will work the same way. They're all different based off of what we find when we're building the job, and doing our soil test.
So what about the landscaping side of the house? So obviously, I mean, you want to make sure that the bricks we're laying are going to stay there for years, if not decades. And so looking at that, when it comes to the plants, we want them to last just as long. Do you change your plant selection based upon the soil that they're going into?
Yeah. So for us, like if you're getting large plants and the customer doesn't want to spend a whole ton of money, excavating a bunch of unsuitable soil or unsuitable dirt, I should say, or clay, and installing good amounts of topsoil, then what we do is we try to get our larger trees from the Raleigh area, if they're B&B, because they're coming out of native clay soil in the Raleigh area.
Yep.
So then when we dig them there, they're used to living in that poor soil or clay area. And so when we install them in the same environment, it's like they never left. However, if you take something, say, from the South Carolina, Georgia area, where it's really sandy, and you pull some plants from nurseries there, and then you put them into an environment that, you dig the hole and you do it all by specs, 3 times as wide, twice as deep, you backfill, but you put that plant in there. Well, now you've dug a hole that just holds water because it can't get out. Well, the plant's new, it's new to it. You're going to put that plant in shock, and that plant's not going to survive. And so you try to source your plants from nurseries that are growing them in similar soils, or you excavate enough dirt out or add drainage in so that that plant feels like it's at home from where it naturally grew, or the soil media that it was raised in.
Does that apply for grass as well?
Yeah. I mean,
because we're talking digging holes. I'm thinking like just surface level.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're planting sod or you're installing sod, the farm that it's harvested from, you're leaving a good amount of root system there in that farm. However, you're bringing in very little amount of dirt with that sod. Those roots are growing down. They want to live, so they're gonna do what they have to do. However, if you're installing sod on clay and there's no nutrients there, then the sod's not going to thrive. Whereas if you can get 6 inches of topsoil and provide some nutrients to it, then it's going to do much better. So yes, it still applies. However, I wouldn't hesitate taking healthy sod from a farm that was clay based and installing it, on a yard that's good in topsoil, because it's only gonna help it, and vice versa. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate taking sod from a loamy farm and installing it on clay, because ultimately it's not the sod's fault at that point. It would be how much topsoil you put in that yard that would give it the best chances. I mean, it's going to try to do all it can, but if you don't apply its nutrients to it, then it's not going to root in anyways.
How does someone find out what type of soil? Like, do they pick the middle of their front yard, then the middle of the backyard, dig down 2 feet? Like, how do you find out what kind of soil you have? So if you're talking to a landscaper, you're like, hey, I've got clay, or I've got predominantly sand or silt.
Yeah, so like one test of that would be, one, you could add a little water to your yard if it hasn't rained, and dig down a few inches, grab it and ball it up in your ball, or ball it up in your hand, and make a ball. And if it doesn't fall apart, then you've got mostly clay and like some silts in there. If it falls apart, then you've got more sand because the water's not allowing it to bind together. And predominantly, I feel like most people know what clay is. So if you've if you look out there in your lawn and it's a bunch of bare spots and you're seeing clay, then you know you've got a clay base there. Uh, for us, we don't have a lot of rocks in our region, in our area, so we don't deal with a rocky soil. However, as you do start traveling west in North Carolina, we get into the mountains, so the other side of Raleigh area, and continuing on, there tends to be a lot more rocks in your soil, which we also tend to find more clay that way. There's usually less sand where you find more rocks. More rocks usually means more clay.
Now, looking at that, are there, is this just everywhere? There's just way different styles of soil, or is that like a North Carolina thing where there's just so many different types in one area?
No, well, no, I mean, you look out west. I mean, we've got prime farmland out west,
I would
where
say
it's
that's
that.
all soil.
Yeah, I mean, it's like really nice, rich, dark soil. But I mean, everywhere, geographically speaking, everywhere you look at, it's going to have its own soil type. Based off the mountains, based off if you're kind of by the beach, if you're in the coastal plains, or the Piedmont region, all that stuff's gonna change geographically, as well as moving north and south. Pennsylvania, for example, I've never dug the holes in Pennsylvania, but I've done some snow skiing out there, and I know that they're full of rocks. So I know that I would say that a large amount of Pennsylvania, and some of the customers I've had, have moved from Pennsylvania, and they have told me stories of how they excavated a foot or so of clay and rock out of their yard, and then backfilled it with topsoil so that they could have an established lawn. And then they had pretty lawns after that. So I know that this same pattern happens all over the place. I will say though, if you're listening to this and you're not from Eastern North Carolina, you can throw a rock from one yard to the next in a different soil type. Um, you know, and we're talking about perkability for like septic tanks. I mean, one piece of land can perk, and then you go over one parcel number and that land not perk. And that's how drastic the soil can change. Or you can drive 20 miles and go from hard clay base to a peat, really really soft, environment, kind of like we have around Lake Phelps area, where literally fires can burn on the ground for months at a time.
Hmm.
So which is also really really dark, nutrient rich soil, and then we have 20-30 miles the other way, dead soil with no nutrients in it, straight clay. So there's drastic changes in a very short period of time here in Eastern North Carolina, as well as sometimes elevation. I mean, for us, we're on the Tar-Pamlico River, so if you look in the Washington, Belhaven, Bath area, we're extremely low. We're not that high above sea level. You jump across the river, there are some areas that are 20, 25 feet above sea level right there on the river. And you're talking about the river there is like a mile and a half, 2 miles, across. And we're looking at 25 foot of elevation difference. And we're over here in the coastal plains where it's supposed to be flat. So we've got a huge elevation difference, huge drastic change in soil types on a 2 mile across a 2 mile river. So it's very very odd to think about.
So you've covered all that. What would you say is the most misunderstood part of soil that homeowners, businesses, or areas that we've had to work? What are the biggest misconceptions or misunderstandings they have when it comes to soil?
Uh, for me personally, in the industry working in our area, this it'll be for our area is what I'm speaking of. People constantly want irrigation systems because they think their yards need more water, and then we'll go out there and look at it, and it's not a lack of water, it's too much water, and it's too much water because they're on clay, and so they have poor soil, and so they think throwing more water on the lawn will help it, when really they need drainage to get rid of the water that's there so that their plants and their grass can thrive, because essentially it's all dying from fungus or root rot, um, and it's just dying out. I spoke about a hard pan and veins, and I'll reference a specific community that I have run into this more times than not, where the properties in Cypress Landing and Chocowinity,
Talk about.
yeah, they are like I said, 1 yard. I know it's 25 foot above sea level, and it could have not rained for 2 weeks, and you will go out there, and the yard you could dig down 3 inches, and the clay is just as wet as can be. And the centipede is struggling on these particular lawns because they've got large patch, because the grass or the ground just never dries out. And what we have come to find out, we've traced out what we thought was irrigation leaks from the neighbor's yard, from their yard, from main water line, running down the street. And after eliminating all that by a simple test, really, of just cutting everything off and making sure you have none, and then, checking water meters, checking flows, checking wells, making sure that, there is no flow, like putting a flow meter on to make sure there's no water running. And after you check all that, you come to find out, you're like, you just have these veins in this soil out here where it's hard pan, and that think of it like two wedges, and you've got water between them, and as you squeeze the two wedges together, you're forcing the water out both sides. And so it's the same way you think of two layers of clay in the soil that has a layer of water that's flowing between it. And as the gravity and the weight of the soil and earth, and then you break it loose, well, now you've just created a leak in that vein, so that where that water can now flow out freely. And sometimes it ends up being in the top hill of someone's yard, where it literally, they're like, this place won't dry up, I've got an irrigation leak. Well, we've had your irrigation on for a month. This isn't an irrigation leak. You just have groundwater that is just coming up. Another example from this community, we went down, we did it this summer, actually. It would have been in the June time frame. No, actually, would have been like May time frame. It was just before we went to Beast Games. We built a retaining wall where there literally was a natural spring. And so we dug this ginormous hole. If you follow us on Facebook, you can go back, and I think I Facebook Live some videos, and I think they stored somehow. But we actually dug a massive hole behind where we're building this retaining wall, and we were pumping this hole out. Like we had one pump, we let it run all day while we're working. It would fill the entire hole up that night, and it'd be running over the hole. The next morning, we'd put the pump back in there, drain that water out, and then continue working, building our wall. And essentially, we ended up building a gigantic French drain where we filled up this natural spring with 57 stone and paper, and then let it naturally flow underneath our wall into the river where it wanted to go anyways, but we just made it all underground in a French drain system. And then reestablish. Awesome. Yeah, then reestablish the soil. It was pretty cool to do, especially when you're building a foundation for a retaining wall, and you're going, man, there's a river trying to run through this thing. And so you figure out a way to, stop that water. But once again, on that particular wall, you've been there, Zach, so you know how high up above the river it is.
Yep.
You wouldn't think that you'd have this water issue, but it's what it is just the groundwater coming through these veins and finding a weak spot. And then you have to figure out, well, how do I stop it? How do I just, you can't stop it. It's groundwater. It's going to come out somewhere. So now you just got to divert it and put it into a drainage system so that you can still build on top of it. And a lot of that comes into, one, putting good clean stone in there, but not just throwing stone in the hole, but laying it with your geotextile fabric, building it up and compacting that stone down, layering it again with your geotextile fabric, and doing that in increments as you go up, so that you can bridge and do away with what's called your phi angle, especially behind a retaining wall, which is the angle in which rock or any material falls. If you drop it all at one point, it'll be the angle in which that rock forms a mountain, and which then creates your load against your retaining wall. So if you can keep layering it, then you reduce your phi angle, which then puts less pressure on your wall. And so it's particularly in an area where there's a lot of water and moisture, you want to keep that as low as possible. And by doing that, layering it and adding all that clean stone, you reduce that and create soil that is now dry, that once was wet.
I think that right there perfectly encapsulates. I think I'm saying that right.
Encapsulates. I mean, you threw some emphasis on it.
Yeah, encapsulates. I think that perfectly captures the point on getting yourself a landscaper that knows through experience, theory, doing the research, obviously in the books, but also just being out in the field, who understands why that is so important. Because I could see that being overlooked, cover it up, the water will just run through, and all of a sudden you're eroding beneath the base of your retaining wall, which when that first domino goes, the rest are going right after it.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you can spend a lot of money that maybe lasts you a year, but by that second year, you're seeing bulging. Third year, the wall's gone.
Yep.
And so I think that right there, hearing you explain that is like you thought through all the steps that went into this and how to divert it and to how to, like you said, keep that load off the back of the wall and to keep the water from eroding under the wall. So all that together is why even if you run into a freaking spring in somebody's yard, there are ways to work around it. You
Yeah.
just, again, having an understanding of the soil is crucial component to that.
Yeah, soil is tricky, particularly when you plant thousands of dollars in plants and they don't live because you recommended the homeowner dig out the clay and install the topsoil, and they opt not to do that. So it's definitely tricky when you come across those scenarios, and it's also tricky when you bid a job and you didn't spend a lot of time investigating. So you're gonna sod an entire lawn. You get out there to dig out and prep, and you're like, man, this is all clay, but I didn't figure any topsoil to come in here. So now I've got to stand behind my work, but I didn't do the investigation to begin with. So you really have to investigate those jobs as you estimate them so that you don't have that issue where the customer is not happy with the work because it didn't live.
You're trying to surprise them with an add-on at the end because you didn't do the work.
That's right.
Which goes back to our episode on the top 3 mistakes people make with their estimates. Avoid that. Be smart, do the research. For anybody that has questions about their soil, or you're looking to get your lawn spruced up and ready to be the lawn in 2026, make sure you hit us up. Ask the questions, we'll answer them below, or reach out to us. You can send a quote request or just contact if you're looking to work with us. But thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys subscribing to the podcast, and we can't wait to drop our next episode for you.